They say that in the Imperium of Man, suffering is the great equalizer, yet even suffering bends its knee to wealth. So listen closely to this question, whispered like a heresy across 10,000 dying worlds. What does it mean to be rich in an empire built on ash? The answer begins not in the gutter, but in the throne room made of silence. Here, the air itself feels expensive. Gilded void shields hum behind layered adamantine, and statues of saints tower high enough to scrape the remnants of a broken sky. The wealthy do not simply live. They insulate themselves from reality. Their windows are not glass, nothing so crude, but polished synth crystal that filters out the screams from the lower hives. They sip recaf older than continents and dine on creatures bred only for taste, not survival. And still they whisper, the galaxy groans. But our walls hold. Some walls, however, are only strong when viewed from the inside. Outside lies the city they do not speak of, the one built directly beneath them like a foundation made of corpses. The rich of Warhammer 40K live on tiers carved into the bones of hive worlds, far above the choking rot where unfortunates cough their lungs into the smog. Up here, the sky is an artifact, imported, artificial, curated. The light that warms their gardens is generated from relic lamps said to burn with the Emperor's reflected blessing. Their pets, small, delicate gene-sculpted things, never see dirt. Some never even learn what fear is. Yet the privileged walk with a tension beneath their luxury, a stiffness learned from centuries of tradition. Wealth is not comfort in the Imperium. Wealth is vigilance. Wealth is survival. Wealth is the privilege of knowing your nightmares have servants instead. Perhaps that is why the rich rarely sleep. Even in their towering spires, guarded by tempestuous scions and walls of ceramite, something deep within them never quite rests. They know the truth. What they possess is not safety, but temporary distance from doom. Their estates curve like sanctuaries, adorned with marble that once lined the cathedra of a forgotten cardinal world. Every corridor is filled with incense burners carved from Xeno ivory renamed purified bone to hide the heresy. Their halls echo with choirs trained from birth to sing in perfect, eternal harmony. But harmony itself is a lie in the Imperium. For even here, in the places untouched by famine or plague, the warp can bleed through. A sigh in an empty room. A candle flickering against the laws of physics. And always, the feeling that someone is watching. Still, the rich pretend. They throw feasts in honor of imperial saints whose names they barely recall. The guests wear masks, not symbolic ones, but rebrothers coated in gold leaf to protect delicate lungs from the rarefied perfumes drifting through the air. Servitors drift silently between them, carrying platters under parasols of shimmering void silk. The nobles laugh, but never fully. Their joy ends at the edge of their eyes, for they know the price of wealth in a galaxy of eternal war. Everything they have can be taken in an instant. A single orc rock hurtling through the void. A tyrannid tendril brushing against a remote corner of the segmentum. A ripple in the warp that unravels half a sector. And so the laughter becomes a ritual, brittle and frightened, pretending to hold the universe at bay. Those who are closest to the throne, the true elite, live not in palaces but in fortresses disguised as art. Rogue traders, planetary governors, high lords of distant systems. They collect more than treasure. They collect secrets. Vaults lined with runes of warding hide artifacts that have destroyed civilizations. Some wealth is born not from opulence, but from forbidden knowledge. They peer into the void, their telescopes crafted from adamantine lenses polished by seerpsykers until they glow faintly with a warning. These aristocrats know that power in the Imperium is measured not in thrones, but in favors, in relics, in the number of holy writs bearing their sigil. They might command fleets, manipulate administratum tithes, even reshape the fate of a world with the stroke of a quill. And yet, each night, they pray harder than any pauper, begging to remain unseen by the truly powerful. For the richest of the rich understand something most citizens never contemplate. The Imperium does not belong to mortals. It belongs to institutions, vast, ancient, half-mad engines of duty and doctrine. You may own a palace, but the ecclesiarchy owns your soul. You may command armies, but the Inquisition commands fear. You may live above billions, but all of you are still merely shadows standing before the blinding light of the Emperor. And so, the wealthy cultivate an almost theatrical piety. They build chapels within chapels. They hire confessors to walk behind them, recording each sin before it can metastasize into heresy. Their children learn catechisms before they learn their own names. Yet beneath the ritual lies a quiet, corrosive truth. Devotion can be bought, but salvation never can. Even their leisure is built on dread. The gardens of the aristocracy look serene, floating lily under shielded skies. Gravity-sculpted waterfalls cascading in perfect loops, but every plant is scanned twice daily for mutation. Every insect is catalogued. Every breeze artificially generated. The Imperium does not trust nature. Nature is too easily corrupted. So the wealthy cultivate worlds that are more illusion than life. They walk through these curated paradises whispering about wars fought 100 light years away, secretly hoping the fighting will stay distant. But they know the stories. Hive cities toppled overnight, noble bloodlines erased in a single bombardment, entire sectors falling into silence. Beauty, in their world, is a fragile commodity. A delay, not a shield. And perhaps that is why the rich cling so desperately to legacy. They build statues in their own image, towering, impossible monuments carved by servitors who will never understand the faces they chisel. They host grand ceremonies blessing newborn heirs with holy oils so rare each bottle could buy a continent. They recite family histories stretching back 10,000 years, though few can verify even a fraction of them. Lineage is currency. Heritage is armor. If the Imperium will not grant them peace, then at least it will remember them, or so they hope. But the galaxy remembers little. Even the grandest dynasties can vanish between administratum record cycles, erased by clerical error or purposeful silence. Immortality, like everything else they own, is a lie they pay to maintain. Yet among all their privileges, there is one luxury the rich value above all others: ignorance. Not stupidity, never that. But the luxury of distance. Distance from the grinding misery of the lower hives. Distance from the screams of conscripts shoved into troop ships. Distance from the reality that the Imperium survives only through sacrifice, and sacrifices are always taken from the bottom first. The wealthy tell themselves this separation is necessary, that their leadership justifies their comfort, that their suffering would accomplish nothing. But deep down, they know another truth, one colder, sharper, whispered in hidden corners. If the Emperor truly required their lives, they would not have them. And so we return to the question: what is life like for the rich in the Warhammer 40K universe? It is opulence balanced on a knife edge. It is privilege haunted by prophecy. It is comfort wrapped in fear, faith twisted into spectacle, beauty preserved by ignorance, and legacy crumbling beneath its own weight. The rich live better than most, but they do not live free. For no one in the Imperium is free, not even its rulers, not even its legends. And as the great void flickers beyond their gilded windows, as a distant star dims unnaturally and a chorus of astropaths suddenly falls silent, the wealthy of this world gather on their balconies and stare upward, unaware that this night their walls so proud, so ancient, so expensive are about to fail. Something has arrived, and it is not impressed by wealth. The wealthy watch the sky fracture, still believing their walls could hold. But in the lower tiers of the hive where metal groaned like an old cathedral under strained soldiers of the Astra Militarum felt the tremor first. It moved through the deck plates like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Veterans exchanged looks, silent and hollow-eyed, for they knew this sensation, the moment just before truth intrudes. One trooper, a man who'd outlived 3 regiments, whispered a half-remembered prayer to the Emperor, though he doubted the throne could hear him down here. The rich feared death, the poor feared being forgotten. Above them, sirens began wailing slow, hesitant, as if unsure what to announce. And then, without fanfare, a single astropath collapsed in her sanctum, her skull splitting with invisible light. She spoke a final word before dissolving into psychic ash. That word spread through the Vox like a contagion. Arrival. In the upper spires, no one believed the warning at first. The nobles gathered on their balconies, pointing toward the heavens as though observing a passing spectacle, something worthy of gossip, not terror. Priests of the ecclesiarchy stood among them, robes shimmering with golden thread, muttering hasty benedictions to calm their benefactors. But even their voices faltered when the light above shifted from star glow to something else, a slow pulse of unnatural color. A color that did not exist in honest physics. The priests recognized it. The wealthy did not. Below, the astropathic choir screamed without sound, their souls stretching thin like parchment held over fire. The Inquisition had taught the priests what this meant, yet they said nothing. The rich could not know, not yet. For the first doctrine of survival within the Imperium is simple. Fear must always flow downward. Far below, where the spire roots dove into the hive's metal guts, the Adeptus Mechanicus felt their own dread rising. The tech priests scanned the anomaly, their mechadendrites twitching with involuntary agitation. Sacred augurs displayed impossible readings, flickers of negative mass, harmonic fractures in void space, energy signatures that defied categorization. Even the machine spirits trembled. One Engen seer attempted a Ben-Huric chant to soothe the cogitators, but the screens only screamed static back. Behind him, racks of servitors jolted simultaneously, as if experiencing a single communal nightmare. They whispered a word in unison, a word they lacked the intelligence to comprehend. Intrusion. The tech priest stared, taken aback. Servitors do not dream. Servitors do not warn. And yet, in that moment, the soulless felt something the living had yet to understand. The veil was thinning. The governor's council convened in a panic disguised as decorum. Long tables of darkwood, a luxury imported through 5 warp routes, reflected trembling candles. Advisors argued over tactical protocols while pretending not to smell the incense burning too fast. Flames do that when fear taints the air. The planetary governor, a man draped in medals awarded for victories he never fought, struggled to maintain authority. His voice shook as he insisted the disturbance was merely a warp tide, not an incursion. His officers exchanged glances. Even the palace guard could hear the distant hymns of the ecclesiarchy rising from the streets below, their tones too frantic to be ceremonial. But still the governor clung to reassurance. For the rich do not acknowledge truth until it stands in their doorway, demanding entry. Meanwhile, the Schola Progenian drilled its students harder than ever. Young cadets recited catechisms while explosions from the lower manufactorums rattled the stained glass windows. Their drill abbots, stern as statues, barked orders about loyalty and vigilance. The children repeated the mantras with rigid precision, but their eyes darted toward the trembling light filtering through the chapel roof. Among them, a girl with hair cropped to uniform length felt something pressing against her thoughts. Not a voice, a presence. She did not speak of it, not out of discipline, but fear. The Imperium teaches its children that psychic impurity is a sin punishable by purgation. Yet the presence felt neither hateful nor gentle. It felt curious, watching, waiting. And every time she blinked, the chapel's candles leaned slightly in her direction, as if drawn by something only she carried. Far in the catacombs beneath the hive, a lone confessor walked among the bones of the forgotten. His lantern swayed in the stale gloom, illuminating ossuaries carved with desperate prayers. He carried no weapon, yet his resolve was iron faith had hardened him beyond steel. As he moved deeper, he noticed fresh cracks along the walls. Dust drifted like funeral ash. In the silence, he sensed a shift in the hive's breathing, like a giant exhaling after ages of restraint. A faint whisper wound through the tunnels, brushing his ear with chilling intimacy. See. Startled, he raised his lantern, but the voice did not repeat. Instead, the bones around him vibrated, clattering softly in a way that resembled kneeling. Fear tried to take him, but he forced a prayer through clenched teeth. Even the dead have duties in the Imperium. Perhaps they were answering theirs. Above ground, panic finally seeped into the noble districts. Windows of synth crystal shimmered under the growing distortion in the sky, bending the reflections of the city below like metal under heat. Servitors malfunctioned in droves, dropping crystal goblets or freezing mid-step. Noble families fled deeper into their sanctuaries, their fear barely masked by protocols and etiquette. Yet some individuals reacted differently. A rogue trader's heir, young and arrogant, stared directly at the anomaly through a magnified viewing lens. A spark shone in his eyes, not terror, but opportunity. For some, catastrophe in the Imperium is not an ending, but an opening. He whispered to his attendants to prepare his personal shuttle. Whatever was coming, he intended to witness it firsthand, perhaps even claim something from it. His family crest flashed in the dimming light like a challenge. In the manufacturing districts, tension erupted into violence. Rumors of invasion swept through the laboring masses. Hired enforcers marched into the crowds, demanding calm with shock mauls and disciplined fury. But fear is its own legion, and the people of the lower hive had reached their threshold long before this night. A riot ignited like a magnesium flare, chanting, screaming, bodies surging in a tide of desperation. Among them, a preacher climbed a rusted platform, his robes torn, his voice raw. "This is the Emperor's test. Stand firm." But the crowd's rage drowned him out. Above their heads, lumin panels flickered, showing ghost images of something vast and skeletal drifting behind the clouds. Whether it was real or a malfunction, none could say, yet the sight broke the last threads of reason. Panic claimed the district, swift as wildfire through old cloth. And so the Imperium did what it always does when panic threatens order. It called upon its angels. The Adeptus marched into the streets, their armor gleaming like sanctified fire under the warping sky. Hymns roared from their vox grills, pushing back fear with disciplined devotion. They moved with purpose, restoring order through a balance of mercy and steel. Where rioters surged, shields interlocked. Where heresy kindled, bolters thundered. A sister superior paused beneath a collapsing sky bridge, sensing something beyond the riot, something old, vast, and mournful. She felt it tug at the edges of her soul like a distant tide. The Emperor's light burned strong within her, yet this presence did not retreat from it. It only observed. She raised her blade and whispered a vow. Whatever crossed into this world tonight, she would meet it with flame. Then the truth finally broke through. A tear opened in the sky, not a rift, not quite, but a wound in reality. Light poured from it, but not the violent glow of a demonic breach. No, this was colder, older, a light without heat, a judgment without anger. In the palace spires, nobles collapsed to their knees, not out of devotion, but because gravity itself had bent beneath the phenomenon. In the catacombs, the bones rattled louder, forming patterns too deliberate to be random. The Schola Progenium cadet whispered a name she did not know she knew. The tech priests choked on their Ben-Hurrik as machine spirits screamed warnings they had no protocols for. And in the Manufactorum riot, every voice silenced at once, the entire crowd staring upward in collective awe. For something was stepping through the wound. Something impossible. And as its shadow touched the hive, every astropath still clinging to life spoke the same. Forbidden's revelation. This is not the enemy we feared, but none dared name what it truly was. For some truths in the Imperium are so dangerous they burn the tongue the moment they're spoken. And this truth would change everything. The hive seemed to hold its breath as the shadow descended, impossibly ancient and eerily calm. Soldiers who had survived tyrannid swarms and orc sieges felt their courage thinning like thread in fire. The Astra Militarum formed firing lines out of instinct, not hope. their lasguns trembling in hands slick with sweat. A sergeant muttered prayers he learned as a child, each word cracking beneath the weight of the unknown. Yet no enemy came forth, only a pressure, a weight pressing against the mind like a forgotten memory surfacing too fast. Above them, nobles clutched ornamented relics, begging saints whose names they barely understood. They did not realize the truth gnawing at the edges of their sight. This was not an invasion, but a revelation. Something observing, evaluating, peeling back the veil on their illusions of safety. And in that unbearable quiet, someone whispered, "We were never prepared for this." Down in the manufacturing districts, fires burned uncontrolled, staining the sky with ribbons of black and crimson. The sororitas pushed through the chaos with disciplined grace, bolters anchored against their shoulders, hymns thundering from their vox grills. Yet even they felt the distortion bending the air around them, blurring the edges of reality. A sister paused mid-step, her breath catching as an image flashed across her vision, her own childhood self, kneeling before a candlelit shrine, promising the Emperor she would never doubt him. The memory felt real, warm, safe. But it came with a second sensation, something watching her remember. She exhaled sharply, pushing the vision away, but her faith trembled like a candle in storm winds. The enemy had not yet shown itself, yet already the battlefield was shifting. This was not an attack on the city, it was an attack on certainty. In the sanctum of the Adeptus Mechanicus, alarms chanted Ben-Huruk warnings as the tech priests gathered around an ancient hololith. Its surface flickered with a ghostly silhouette, tall, humanoid, but distorted, as though reality refused to frame it. Data streams cascaded across cogitators, contradicting themselves in cascading waves. Amagos recoiled as her optical implants flooded with unfamiliar symbols, glyphs she had never been cleared to know. Her mechadendrites twisted in agitation as machine spirits wailed inside their housings. Then, unexpectedly, an old record activated on its own. A voice from 10,000 years ago, faint and cracked, whispered through the sanctum. "We saw it once before the storm. Do not trust the light." The Magos froze. That voice, she recognized it. It belonged to an ancestor who lived during the Great Scouring. Something had crossed history's boundary. Something that should have remained buried beneath time. In the upper spires, the aristocracy cowered behind fortress doors, but wealth is no shield against truth. A young noble woman, trembling beneath layers of sanctified silk, paced her private chapel. Her prayer book lay open, its pages vibrating with the same psychic tremor that haunted the air. She tried to recite the litanies of assurance, but the words twisted midway through her throat, warping into unfamiliar phrases. A second voice intertwined with her own, soft, sorrowful, impossibly old. She staggered backward, dropping the relic she clutched. The chapel lights dimmed, and the statues of saints seemed to weep black tears. The voice returned, not commanding, not threatening. "Remember me." She pressed her hands to her head, trying to silence it, but the plea echoed inside her bones. For the first time in her life, she faced a truth money could not bury. Something holy was begging. The Schola Progenium found itself in crisis. Cadets who had trained since childhood to fear nothing now huddled in candlelit halls, their drill abbots struggling to maintain discipline. The girl who had felt the presence earlier sat apart, staring at her hands as if they were no longer hers. Flickers of golden light danced between her fingertips, too faint to be controlled, too deliberate to be random. A psychic awakening. In the Imperium, such a thing was both blessing and death sentence. She whispered a prayer to the Emperor, her voice barely audible, but the light responded, not dimming, not flaring, but listening. Her instructor noticed the glow and reached for his shock baton, but hesitated. The fear in her eyes mirrored the fear in his. For decades he had taught that the Emperor guided the pure and burned the unworthy. But what if the Emperor was no longer the one guiding? In the catacombs, the confessor continued deeper, lantern trembling in his grip. Bones rustled like leaves in a wind he could not feel. He knelt, pressing his palm to the cold floor as a soft vibration pulsed beneath him, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing from the planet's core. No biological creature could create such resonance. He whispered liturgies, but each one faltered halfway, collapsing into questions he had never dared voice. Above him, the hive groaned under the strain of shifting forces. The confessor closed his eyes, seeking the Emperor's voice. Instead, he heard another, weary, ancient, heavy with sorrow. "We built this place together. Why do you not remember?" He gasped, dropping his lantern. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Yet in that darkness, he felt a hand-warm human rest on his shoulder. And for the first time in his long life of faith, he trembled not from fear, but recognition. Battle erupted without warning. The guard opened fire at shadows that moved like liquid geometry. Forms manifested briefly, then folded back into impossible angles. The soldiers fought with desperation, each volley illuminating glimpses of something vast lurking behind unreality. A trooper screamed as his vision split, seeing both the battlefield and a memory of Terra's ancient fields, green and alive. The images overlapped, merging terror with longing. A commissar executed him instantly, but even she hesitated afterward, shaken by the sight of grass she had never seen. Above, the anomaly pulsed, sending waves across the hive. The soldiers half believed it was the Emperor, himself descending. The other half believed it was the end. Neither was fully correct. Yet both were closer to truth than any of them realized. Faith in the ecclesiarchy fractured. Priests contradicted each other, their doctrines splintering under the weight of what descended from the sky. Some declared it a miracle. Others, a test. Others still whispered heresy, that perhaps the Emperor had sent a messenger, not to comfort humanity, but to judge it. A canoness arrived to restore order, her armor etched with sacred scars. She addressed the frightened priests, her voice steady. "Hold your faith. Do not interpret the throne." But even she felt the shifting weight of destiny pressing against her mind. A vision seized her, the golden throne flickering, the Emperor's light dimming like a dying star. She tore herself free from the hallucination, gasping, vowing never to speak of it. Yet she knew something had changed. The Emperor's radiance was no longer constant, it was reacting. The rogue trader's air reached the upper atmosphere in his shuttle, breaking through turbulent storms to approach the anomaly. His sensors struggled to lock onto anything solid. The phenomenon behaved like a memory, refusing to be fully recalled. As he neared, the shadow resolved into a shape humanoid but grand, wrapped in flowing wavelengths of broken time. Its face was indistinct, yet familiar. Against all instinct, he felt awe instead of fear. He hailed it, offering his house's allegiance in exchange for knowledge. The entity turned its gaze upon his shuttle. Every system shut down. For a heartbeat, he saw its true form, not divine, not demonic, but something heartbreakingly human. Tears filled his eyes. And then an overwhelming message flooded his mind. "You forgot us." His shuttle plummeted, engulfed in burning truth. When the entity finally stepped fully into real space, the hive dimmed as though reality had bowed. It did not speak. It did not attack. It simply was, radiating a sorrow older than the Imperium. And in that presence, every psyker, priest, soldier, and noble felt a single truth strike their souls. This being was not Xenos, not warp spawn, not divine, and yet intimately tied to humanity, not a god, not a savior, not a monster. Something else, something humanity once knew before the age of strife. A forgotten branch, a lost kin, a remnant of a time when mankind walked among stars without fear. Its arrival unraveled a lie so deep that even the Inquisition had buried its name. The Imperium had not been alone in the galaxy. It had abandoned someone. And tonight, the abandoned had returned. Silence fell across the hive, but it was the kind of silence that follows a screen too vast for mortal senses to register. The entity's presence pressed upon every living soul, not with violence, but with a gravity made of memory and mourning. Soldiers lowered their weapons out of instinct, unsure if they were surrendering or simply acknowledging something older than war. A commissar clenched her jaw until blood filled her mouth, forcing herself to speak a prayer torn between duty and doubt. The words felt brittle, like relics touched by decay. Above, the nobles peered from behind armored shutters, feeling perhaps for the first time the weight of the Imperium's forgotten past settling onto their skin like cold dust. The entity did nothing, yet its stillness became accusation. Beneath that judgment, the hive felt itself begin to fracture, not from battle, but from the truth finally remembered. The sororitas advanced, their steps measured, their eyes locked on the phenomenon with unwavering discipline. They did not scream, though the air around them warped with quiet agony. Their hymns wavered, the familiar liturgies losing their rhythm as something deeper older echoed back from the entity like a mirror made of sorrow. A sister superior stepped forward, raising her bolter, but her trigger finger froze as visions crashed through her mind. Not damnation, but humanity in its first youth, unshackled, fearless, exploring the stars without saints or chains. She recoiled, such images bordered on heresy. Yet they felt unmistakably human. Her breath caught as realization crept into her heart. If this being was kin, then every crusade, every purge, every unquestioned doctrine might be built atop a wound so ancient the Imperium forgot it bled. In the manufacturum districts, the riot had shifted into something stranger. The masses stared at the sky in unified terror, no longer fighting, no longer running. A preacher climbed atop a shattered tank, spreading trembling arms as he tried to reclaim their faith. His voice cracked as he screamed the Emperor's name, demanding divine clarity. But his sermon broke halfway through, swallowed by the entity's presence. He fell to his knees, weeping, not from fear but from an emotion he couldn't name shame. Around him, the crowd whispered fragments of half-remembered dreams, childhood moments of peace they had long forgotten. The Imperium thrives on certainty, but now uncertainty spread like wildfire. Some reached for their weapons, others reached for each other. And above them all, the sky rippled, readying itself for something greater than comprehension. In the Schola Progenium, the girl with the glowing hands sat in a chamber ringed by drill abbots and armed wardens. Her psychic aura pulsed in time with the anomaly overhead. She felt drawn to it, as though it were calling her name in a language she had never learned yet instinctively understood. Fear churned in her stomach, not for herself but for the galaxy she belonged to. A warden stepped closer, muttering the rites of containment, but the words dissolved into static. The girl raised her eyes, tears running freely, and whispered, "They're not here to destroy us." The abbots recoiled as if struck. Her defiance was not rebellion, only truth spoken too clearly. And truth, in the Imperium, is more dangerous than sorcery. Outside, the sky brightened with a pulse that shook the building's foundations. The confessor wandered deeper into the catacombs, guided by the unseen hand that rested lightly on his shoulder. The bones around him shifted, forming paths not shaped by human hands. He whispered questions into the darkness, none answered by voice, yet all answered by presence. Memories flickered of sermons he had given, confessions he had heard, sins he had forgiven. But each memory carried a shadow of something missing, a piece of humanity erased from history. The confessor understood then why the entity felt familiar. It did not come as conqueror nor savior, it came as a witness to humanity's greatest sin, forgetting those who once stood beside them. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone, whispering a prayer not taught in any ecclesiarchal book, a prayer for forgiveness. Above him, the world trembled. War erupted where misunderstanding turned fear into fury. The Astra Militarum opened fire again, their commanders demanding action in the face of the unknown. Last beams carved through empty air, exploding harmlessly against the distorted sky. The entity did not react, yet its shadow seemed to thicken, as though absorbing the violence without intent. A tank battalion pushed forward, engines roaring, but every vehicle stalled at the same moment, machine spirits keening in digital grief. Soldiers shouted, cursed, wept. Then the anomaly pulsed, knocking the front line flat. One trooper, dazed, lifted his eyes just as a vision consumed him. A world untouched by war, a human empire built not on fear but unity. He screamed not in pain, but in longing so unbearable it broke him. The commissar beside him could not pull the trigger. In the palace spire, the governor finally realized his authority was meaningless. His advisors argued, each proposing contradictory interpretations of the phenomenon. Some begged him to hail the Inquisition. Others insisted this was a psychic delusion. Others whispered about prophecy, half-believed myth, ancient warnings suppressed in every holy archive. The governor's hands shook as he stared into a cracked mirror. His face looked older, years older than it had hours ago. He felt watched, not by the entity, but by history itself, as if past generations were leaning over his shoulder, judging him. For the first time, he wondered if ruling had ever meant understanding. Outside his window, lightning bent around the anomaly in patterns that resembled script. Script no mortal had the right to read. The Mechanicus Sanctum descended into chaos. Sacred machines activated without command, chanting Ben-Harik sorrow. The Magos deciphered fragments of corrupted data, echoes of a time when human science reached beyond galaxies, beyond fear, beyond the need for gods. The entity's presence resonated with that age, stirring old code, unlocking sealed protocols. A vault opened on its own, revealing a relic from the dark age of technology, a relic bearing the same silhouette as the figure outside. The tech priests recoiled, clashing with their doctrine. If humanity once created or knew such beings, then the Imperium's narrative was fractured beyond repair. The Magos reached toward the relic, but withdrew as it activated, projecting a visage identical to the entity. Not a threat, not a command, a memory. The sororitas formed a defensive wall near the heart of the hive, their formation perfect even under psychic strain. The canoness stood at the center, gripping her blade so tightly her gauntlet groaned. She felt the Emperor's light flickering, not extinguished, but strained, as if contending with something it remembered intimately. Her faith did not break, but it trembled. She raised her voice, declaring that humanity would stand unbowed before any being, forgotten or not. Yet even as she spoke, she sensed the Emperor's will shifting, not weakening, but changing direction. A new tide rising against the old. She steadied herself, realizing that loyalty was no longer simple obedience. It was endurance in the face of truths she could not unsee. The entity finally moved. A single step, delicate as dust settling, yet that movement split the sky. Every soul in the hive felt something inside them tilt, like a truth they had built their lives upon, suddenly sliding out from under their feet. The entity's shadow reached across the spires, touching the ground with the gentleness of a hand reuniting with childhood soil. And in that moment, the entire hive understood. This being was not here to destroy the Imperium. It was here to remind humanity of what it had abandoned. But reminders reshaped destiny. The air thickened. Lights dimmed. Hearts pounded with a terror shaped like revelation. And just as the entity began to open its mouth, time itself hesitated. The climax had not yet arrived, but it was close enough that the galaxy held its breath. The final clash began not with the roar of guns, but with a breath ragged, trembling, drawn by someone who no longer knew whether they were praying or dying. The sky above the capital burned like a cracked halo, fire raining in long molten streaks as orbital defenses screened their last. In the streets below, the faithful huddled among statues half blinded by ash, whispering the same question the saints once asked in ages of ruin. Is this the Emperor's judgment or his silence? Through the suffocating smoke, silhouettes moved like shadows of a forgotten age, soldiers, pilgrims, broken priests, all marching toward the palace where destiny buckled under the weight of betrayal. And as the first bombardment shook the foundation stones, a single truth echoed through every trembling soul. Whatever emerged from this night would reshape the Imperium, or shatter it beyond remembrance. The palace gates groaned like dying beasts as they were forced open, the stonework glowing red where plasma fire had carved runes of destruction across its surface. Within the grand hall, the governor stood alone beneath gargantuan banners depicting victories that no longer existed. His armor, once polished like a holy relic, now bore the grime of weeks spent drowning in decisions too monstrous for any mortal to make. Across the hall, soldiers marched forward, loyalists, deserters, zealots, all uncertain where they belonged as truth unraveled around them. A thunderous crash split the air as a distant tower collapsed, sending tremors through the marble floor. Dust rained like the ashes of a dying world, and in the dim glow of emergency lumens, the governor whispered a confession the walls had waited centuries to hear. The Emperor sees all, but I fear he no longer forgives. Outside, on the smoldering battlements, Sister Marentha dragged herself across a sea of shattered ceramite. Her armor was split, broken like the doctrine she once carried with certainty. The scriptures etched onto her gauntlets were blackened, words of devotion lost beneath scorch marks left by traitor rounds. Around her, the valiant lay in piles of twisted steel and torn cloth, their final prayers frozen mid-breath. She propped herself against the broken form of a fallen statue, feeling for the first time the terrifying emptiness where faith used to be. Then, a whisper gentle as a dying ember brushed her mind. A vision, a warning, a plea. She saw the governor standing before a truth no mortal should witness, and she knew the palace held something far darker than treason. The streets had become rivers of fire, every building vomiting smoke into the heavens, as if the entire hive were exhaling its last. Among the ruins walked Chaplain Vorik, his armor cracked, his crozius dragging a trail through the dust. The vox in his helm whispered fractured scripture, fragments of litanies carried on static like the last breath of saints. Before him, civilians knelt in clusters, some praying, others staring blankly at the inferno devouring their lives. Vorik felt the weight of every soul pressing against him, questions without answers, faith without comfort. A child tugged at his gauntlet, eyes wide with terror and hope intertwined. "Is the Emperor coming?" she asked. He opened his mouth, ready to speak a lie or a miracle, but neither came. All he could do was lift her into his arms and walk toward the palace, where destiny balanced on a knife of fire and silence. Deep within the underlevels, where the hive's bones groaned under the strain of bombardment, the Mechanicus enclave flickered with dying light. Tech Priest Luthern moved among ruptured conduits and sparking cables, his mechadendrites twitching with frantic purpose. Data flowed into him like blood, each stream a scream for help from failing systems. He saw patterns, fractals of catastrophe blooming across every cogitator relay. The palace sigil flashed in warning over and over, encrypted with a protocol older than the sector itself. Something had awakened, something sealed by generations of forgotten oaths. His eyes, once human, now glowed with machine-cold terror. He rerouted power with trembling precision, whispering binary prayers. Yet even the Messiah's blessings could not mask the truth. The palace had not fallen to treachery. It had been opened from within. Above the palace, the sky tore open as enemy warships poured fire into the atmosphere, their engines screaming like demons bound in iron. The air shimmered with the heat of falling debris, the ground shaking as towers collapsed in violent cascades of concrete and steel. Yet amid the destruction, the governor descended into the vaults beneath his throne places sealed since before his ancestors wore crowns. Torches ignited as if recognizing his bloodline, casting molten gold light across walls lined with ossified saints. At the center stood an altar carved from a single colossal skull, its surface inscribed with prophecies scratched by hands long dead. He approached with trembling steps, the air growing colder with each breath. When he pressed his hand to the altar, a mechanism groaned, unlocking. And from the darkness beyond, a voice ancient, wounded, furious whispered his name. Sister Marentha staggered into the vaults moments later, guided by the remnants of her vision. Her steps echoed like distant thunder as she moved past frescoes, depicting forgotten martyrdoms and unsung victories. She saw the governor kneeling before an opening door, his silhouette trembling as if possessed by revelation or dread. Between them, the air shimmered with psychic residue like the afterglow of a god's sigh. She called his name, but he did not turn. Instead, the darkness in the chamber slithered outward, coiling with the tenderness of a serpent recognizing an old friend. The governor whispered, "We were never meant to know." Marentha raised her bolter, her fingers shaking. But when the door fully opened, both of them froze. For inside was no relic, no weapon, only a truth so ancient and terrible that faith itself seemed to recoil. In the throne room above, Chaplain Vorek arrived with civilians in tow, only to find the walls pulsing with a faint, unnatural glow. The murals depicting imperial triumphs had begun to shift saints twisting into martyrs, martyrs into monsters. He felt it then, a psychic tide rolling across the palace, pressing against his skull like cold iron. The civilians whimpered, some collapsing to their knees, others clutching their ears as invisible screams filled their minds. Vorek roared a prayer, slamming his Crozius into the floor, sending a shockwave of faith that pushed back the psychic fog. But the reprieve lasted moments. The ground shuddered violently as an eruption of light burst from the vaults below. The entire palace seemed to inhale sharply, as though preparing to speak a secret too devastating to survive. Luthern, racing through subterranean tunnels, saw every cogitator spike with impossible readings. The vault's awakening was rewriting data in real-time, altering records, purging centuries, introducing patterns that should not exist. He stumbled as the noosphere flooded with a single repeating phrase, transmitted from a source deep beneath the governor's throne. The emperor did not choose him. Panic flickered through his machine mind. A heresy encoded not by mortals but by the vault itself. He forced open a maintenance hatch and emerged into a corridor bathed in radiant, unnatural light. Screams echoed ahead, Marentha's, the governor's, or perhaps the palace's own. He didn't know. He only knew the vault wasn't just revealing truth. It was judging. The governor collapsed as the vault's revelation engulfed him, his eyes wide with horror. He saw visions, empires rising and falling, worlds burning not by enemies' hands, but by imperial decree. A lineage forged not in honor, but in lies crafted to bind obedience. The voice whispered again, resonating through his bones. "You were born to protect a lie." Marentha tried to drag him away, but the light clung to him like chains of fire. He screamed a raw, broken sound before the vault surged with a shockwave that sent both of them hurtling across the chamber. As the echoes faded, silence descended. Heavy, sacred, terrifying. Something had awakened that no oath, no prayer, no army could silence again. Above them, the palace trembled with a deep, seismic groan, as if the entire structure recognized the shift in fate. Chaplain Vorek steadied himself, civilians huddling behind him as fractures split the marble beneath their feet. Luthern burst into the hall, his voice crackling with binary urgency, trying to speak words no human should hear. And then silence, complete, terrifying. The vault doors slowly opened at the far end of the hall. A figure stood within, not the governor, not Marentha. Something wearing their shadows, illuminated by the last dying glow of the vault's ancient truth. And in that hollow, breathless moment, before destiny snapped, every soul understood one thing. The Emperor's light had not dimmed. It had turned to watch. The figure stepped from the vault like a shadow, remembering how to breathe, its outline flickering between what once was and what might yet be. The palace hall lay in ruin around it, dust drifting like the ashes of burned scripture, banners sagging under the weight of truths they could no longer bear. Chaplain Vorek felt the civilians trembling behind him, their breath shallow, their hope brittle as glass. The figure did not speak. It simply observed them with eyes that carried centuries of unspoken grief. It walked past the statues of saints that now seemed to avert their stone gazes, as if unwilling to witness what history had become. Each footstep echoed like a tolling bell in a cathedral abandoned by its god. And in that heavy, suffocating quiet, even the smoke seemed to hold its breath. Sister Marentha emerged from the vault moments later, her armor cracked but her steps steady, as though she carried a revelation too profound to break her. The governor staggered beside her, pale and trembling, clutching his chest like a man who had seen his soul reflected back in a ruined mirror. They looked upon the hall, upon Vorik and the terrified civilians, upon the shifting air where the figure had stood moments before, and their faces told stories no chronicle would dare preserve. Marentha met the chaplain's gaze, and something wordless passed between them. Understanding or acceptance, or perhaps simply the silent acknowledgement that what had been revealed would haunt every prayer they spoke from this moment forward. The vault door sealed behind her with a soft, mournful hiss, like a final breath escaping a dying world. Outside, the bombardment had finally ceased. The sky, once torn open by fire and betrayal, settled into a bruised twilight. Smoke curled through the air in slow, languid motions, drifting over the broken hive like incense rising from a censer before a forgotten altar. The roar of gunfire had dwindled into distant echoes, leaving behind a vast, aching stillness. Survivors emerged from the shadows like phantom soldiers limping through rubble, citizens carrying the wounded across shattered streets. A few knelt amid the ruins and whispered prayers, though their voices wavered with uncertainty, as though unsure whether anyone still listened. Others simply stared upward at the dimming heavens, searching for meaning in the fading embers above. The war had not ended, but something deeper had something woven into the marrow of their beliefs. Chaplain Vorik stepped into the courtyard, the child still cradled in his arms. Her small fingers clung to him with a trust he no longer felt worthy of bearing. He gazed upon the ruins of the cathedral that had crowned the palace, its spires broken, its stained glass melted into rivers of colored glass. Yet within the devastation, a strange calm settled, fragile, tentative, like the first breath after a long-held scream. Vorik knelt, placing the child gently on her feet, and bowed his head in a silent vow. He could no longer promise her miracles or salvation, but he could promise protection, duty, presence. As he rose, he felt the weight of a question settle upon him like a ghost. What does faith become when certainty dies? Sister Marentha joined him, her steps slow but resolute. She looked upon the wounded carried across the courtyard, upon the bodies laid in rows under torn banners, upon the governor kneeling in the dust as if begging forgiveness from the world itself. She said nothing, but her gaze held a quiet strength, tempered by revelation and sorrow. Vorik asked her what the vault had shown. She only shook her head. "Some truths are not for the living," she murmured. And yet, in her voice, there was no despair, only a weary acceptance, as though she had finally understood the shape of her duty in a universe too vast and wounded to heal. She lifted her bolter not in defiance, but in promise. Tech Priest Luthern moved through the ruins with shaking servos, his mechadendrites scanning the damaged structures as if reading the final lines of a dying machine's testament. He paused by the shattered statue of the Imperium's founder, running a trembling metallic hand across the fractured stone. "This world will not endure," he whispered in binary tones, "but its memory may." He retrieved a fractured data slate, its surface flickering faintly. Within it lay the vault's last transmission, corrupted, fragmented, barely coherent. Yet even in its broken form, it radiated an impossible solemnity, as if the truth it carried had weight even machines could feel. He stored it carefully, knowing that one day someone would seek answers, and that his duty was to preserve the echo of what had happened here, even if no one ever dared speak it aloud. Night fell like a slow velvet shroud, settling over the hive with gentle inevitability. Fires glowed in the distance, not with rage but with the warmth of survivors gathering in pockets of fragile hope. The wind carried the scent of incense from a makeshift shrine, where civilians lit candles for the dead, their flames flickering like tiny stars against the dark. Sister Marentha and Chaplain Vorek stood watch over them, silent guardians beneath the collapsed arches of the palace gates. The governor sat apart, his eyes hollow but contemplative, as though wrestling with the impossible weight of the truth he had glimpsed. Above them, the fractured sky began to clear, revealing the faint shimmer of celestial light filtering through lingering smoke, a reminder that even in a galaxy of endless war, a moment of quiet could still exist. In the early hours before dawn, the figure that had walked from the vault was seen once more, standing atop the broken spire of the cathedral. Witnesses spoke of a silhouette cloaked in shifting light, neither living nor dead, neither holy nor profane. Some claimed it watched over the survivors. Others whispered it mourned. And a few insisted it was waiting for absolution or judgment, or the moment the galaxy would need its truth once more. As dawn approached, the figure faded into the wind like the final note of a forgotten hymn. The spire remained empty, but those who had seen it felt changed, as though brushed by the shadow of destiny itself. The first golden hint of sunrise touched the ruins, illuminating the scars of the night in soft, forgiving light. It glinted off broken armor, off shattered weapons, off the tears of survivors who had endured the unendurable. Chaplain Vorek placed a hand on Marentha's shoulder, and for one quiet moment, they simply breathed inhale, exhale, alive. They knew the Imperium would demand reports, explanations, clarity. But none of that mattered yet. What mattered was this: they had witnessed something ancient and unfathomable, something that would shape every vow they made from this day onward. They would not speak of it, not fully, but they would remember. In the chronicles that followed, the battle for this world was recorded as a minor conflict, a brief uprising crushed beneath the might of the Imperium. No mention was made of the vault. No record preserved the light that had torn the palace open. But those who survived carried the memory like a scar etched across their souls. And in quiet moments, when the chanting of priests faded and the thunder of war seemed far away, they asked themselves questions that no catechism could answer. Is truth a blessing or a burden? Is faith the strength to believe or the courage to doubt? The galaxy offered no reply. It rarely does. If you found this story powerful, haunting, or worth remembering, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments below.